Hello, my name is Deitrick, and as an MIT Summer Research Program intern, I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Heidi Neff on a project titled Investigating the Relationship Between Physical Parameters and Carbon Storage in Seagrass Meadows Across Variable Landscapes. Let's begin. What is blue carbon? Blue carbon is the carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere by coastal ecosystems like seagrass meadows. Seagrass meadows store blue carbon by two means. First, retaining it in their biomass, just like trees on land, taking in that carbon dioxide and using it to grow. And second, a little bit more unique to seagrass meadows, trapping the carbon-containing sediment on the ocean floor. Despite the valuable ecosystem services that seagrass meadows provide, such as flood mitigation and serving as habitats for aquatic life, seagrass meadows are one of the most threatened ecosystems on Earth, losing 7% of their aerial cover per year. Thus, in order to slow climate change, seagrass meadows need to be protected and restored. Now, in order for seagrass meadows to trap the sediment, the hydrodynamic conditions must be present at the meadow. This is especially important because over 50% of the sediment trapped in a seagrass meadow is allochthonous, meaning that it originated from outside of the meadow. The meadow on the left-hand side is very sparse, the soil is quite sandy, so when sediment is traveling in the flow across this meadow, it will most likely not get trapped and won't serve as great of a carbon sink. Whereas the seagrass meadow on the right-hand side is a very dense meadow, so as that sediment comes along from a place outside of the meadow, this meadow will have a greater chance of trapping that sediment and acting as a vital carbon sink. However, hydrodynamic conditions can vary across seagrass landscapes. And this is due to, first, varying morphology. So in the top of the screen, you can see that each of these seagrass species look very different. The size, the shape, the number of leaves per shoot all vary, and this creates different hydrodynamic conditions. And then on the bottom, the second variation, shoot density, how many shoots per area. So on the left-hand side, you can see that it's a very sparse meadow, very sandy soil, and will not trap as much sediment coming by from outside of the meadow. Whereas as we increase that density moving from the left-hand side to right-hand side of that bottom photo, we see a highly dense meadow that will do a great job acting as a carbon sink and trapping that carbon-containing sediment. Some parameters to consider when assessing the variation in carbon storage across seagrass landscapes are the following. First, carbon content in bare versus vegetated seagrass meadows, the top picture, no vegetation, and then the bottom picture, very highly vegetated meadow, seeing how the carbon content in those soils differ. Two, shoot density, shoots per area, and you can see this research scientist counting the number of seagrass shoots within that white square. And then number three, the ratio of frontal area, the view of the seagrass meadow that you would see if you were the flow of water going through, and that ratio to the bed area if you were a bird looking down on the seagrass meadow. Dr. Alyssa Novak from Boston University visited 10 sites in Massachusetts to compare vegetated versus unvegetated seagrass species and considering parameters like shoot density and that ratio of frontal area to bed area that we discussed on the previous slide. And what you can see from this graph is that as shoot density increases, the carbon storage increases, that ratio of vegetated carbon to bare carbon, suggesting that if we plant a denser meadow, we will be able to trap more carbon, which is a great thing. And my contribution to the project was analyzing data from a seagrass meadow in Gazi Bay, Kenya. And here, 4 different seagrass species were considered. And if you look at all the photos, you can see that they look quite different from one another. And we think that these plants, because they have varying morphology, that's what's causing the clusters of data points on the graph among species and why they aren't homogeneous, why they're different. And I want to investigate this parameter further to isolate other variables to see, is this morphology the driving factor for why they're all storing different amounts of carbon? In conclusion, seagrass meadows are a vital coastal ecosystem that can help us to mitigate climate change. And the ultimate goal of this project is to create guidelines for management and restoration of seagrass meadows for a blue carbon market. And a blue carbon market would essentially allow for an increase in investment in coastal restoration projects that could revitalize damaged ecosystems. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.